President Biden and NATO allies met in Brussels today to reaffirm the alliance's solidarity in the face of the ongoing and brutal Russian invasion of Ukraine. Mr. Biden said the United States and NATO would respond if Russia uses weapons of mass destruction, a new and sobering warning of what is at stake as war engulfs Europe's largest nation. Meantime, Ukrainian forces push back against Russian forces throughout the country today. Jane Ferguson begins our reporting from the capital, Kyiv.
The Ukrainian military says the burning vessel in this video is a Russian ship struck by Ukrainian forces. It was docked in Berdyansk and can carry dozens of tanks, armored vehicles, and hundreds of troops. Another major loss adding to Russia's already steep logistical challenges. But last night, Moscow stepped up its assault further north in the suburbs of Kyiv. What looks like a shimmering firework in the night sky, actually the brutal incendiary weapon, white phosphorus. It's typically used as a smokescreen, but can burn hot enough to melt flesh. In the south, Ukraine is trying to retake the city of Kherson and pushing Russia away from Mykolaiv. In the north, Ukrainian counteroffensives forestall an assault on the capital, a city many military analysts expected to fall within days of Russia's invasion. Now, 1 month into the conflict, the Ukrainian flag still flies in Kyiv, and her residents are adapting to wartime life. Some, like Andre, pine for the past.
I feel hopelessness. One doesn't know what to do next, how to behave. I try to keep calm and only hope that everything will be over and all will be fine, as it was before.
But cafe owner Evgeny decided to not wait any longer to open his shop.
It was last Thursday or Friday that I understood that it's not a matter of 1 week or 2 weeks, perhaps not even a month. Relatives, family, the military needs this support.
More support is also needed on the humanitarian front. The United Nations says more than half of all Ukrainian children, some 4.3 million, have been displaced by the month-long war. To showcase unity against Russia, today in Brussels, a flurry of diplomacy. As President Biden and Western leaders attended a trio of emergency summits, including a meeting of NATO's North Atlantic Council.
We are determined to continue to impose costs on Russia to bring about the end of this brutal war.
NATO agreed to strengthen its Eastern European defenses. 4 new battle groups will go to Bulgaria, Romania, Hungary, and Slovakia, doubling NATO's presence. NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg, whose term was extended today into late next year, also promised to help Ukraine prepare against potential attacks with weapons of mass destruction.
We see that Russia is trying to create some kind of pretext accusing Ukraine, United States, NATO allies for preparing to use chemical and biological weapons.
But citing a long list of weapons he says are vital for his country, including tanks and planes, President Volodymyr Zelensky called on allies to do more.
This morning, phosphorus bombs were used. Adults were killed again, and children were killed again. The alliance can still prevent the deaths of Ukrainians from Russian occupation by providing us with all the weapons we need.
Members of the G7, a group of the world's richest democratic nations, also met separately today to discuss sanctions evasion and how to further impair the Russian central bank. But at a meeting of European leaders, divisions remain over imposing an embargo on Russian gas and oil imports.
It would have a devastating impact on the European economy. I think this is not necessary.
Meanwhile, the U.S. imposed new sanctions on Russian elites, including 40 defense companies and half of Russia's legislature. President Biden also announced plans to accept 100,000 refugees and additional funding to help other countries with their migrant surges.
This is an international responsibility. The United States, as the leader, one of the leaders in the international community, has an obligation to be engaged and do all we can to ease the suffering and pain of innocent women and children and men, for that matter, throughout Ukraine, and those who have made it across the border.
He also pledged to respond if Putin attacked with chemical weapons.
We would respond. We would respond if he uses it. The nature of the response would depend on the nature of the use.
And Biden defended sanctions against charges that they're insufficient.
Sanctions never deter. The maintenance of sanctions increasing the pain. We will sustain what we're doing, not just next month, the following month, but for the remainder of this entire year. That's what will stop it.
As world leaders meet to discuss how to further punish Russia for its invasion of Ukraine, the war here enters its second month. Ukrainian forces continue to hold out in the face of overwhelming firepower from the Russian army, and in some places advance against it. But there is still a sense on the ground here that no matter how successful their defense is, this war will only really end when Putin decides. Judy?
Thank you, Jane, for your important reporting. Jane's reporting and our ongoing coverage of the war in Ukraine is supported by the Pulitzer Center.
Before the NATO summit in Brussels, the peacekeeping debate flared up. Poland wants NATO peacekeepers to be deployed to Ukraine. I think a peace mission should be established in NATO and in a broad international structure. This mission will operate on the territory of Ukraine and will be capable of self-defense. The statement that alarmed Russia was made on March 15. Prime ministers of 3 European countries visited the capital of Ukraine, Kyiv. Polish Deputy Prime Minister Jarosław Kaczynski put forward the peacekeeping proposal. A few days later, the Polish Prime Minister announced that they would bring the issue forward at the NATO summit. Russia's Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov gave a warning that this step could lead to a war between Russia and the West against the possibility of a NATO force being deployed. Our Polish colleagues said that peacekeeper troops should be sent to Ukraine before the NATO summit. I hope they know what they're talking about. This causes direct confrontation between Russia and NATO armed forces. Until now, everyone has tried to avoid it and has agreed that it shouldn't happen. Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov said Poland's offer was reckless and extremely dangerous. He said that a possible conflict between Russia and NATO could have unrecoverable and serious consequences. Poland's offer did not find a response from Germany either. Prime Minister Olaf Scholz spoke clearly. NATO will not be a party to the war, he said. He said they supported the no-fly zone and peacekeeping proposal. NATO peacekeepers have previously operated in Bosnia, Kosovo, and Afghanistan.
Remember, if you covered me from the very beginning, I did not say that, in fact, sanctions would deter him. Sanctions never deter. You keep talking about that. Sanctions never deter. The maintenance of sanctions, the increasing the pain, and the demonstration why I asked for this NATO meeting today is to be sure that after a month we will sustain what we're doing, not just next month, the following month, but for the remainder of this entire year. That's what will stop it. The single most important thing is for us to stay unified. And the world continue to focus on what a brute this guy is. And all the innocent people's lives have been lost and ruined. What's going on? That's the important thing. But look, if you're Putin and you think that the Europe is going to crack in a month, 6 weeks, 2 months, why not? They can take anything for another month. We have to demonstrate. The reason I asked for the meeting, we have to stay fully, totally, thoroughly ready.
Такого единения у нас давно не было.
that we expect to be announced tomorrow, to what degree will they complement those that have already been put in place?
Well, we heard from President Biden's National Security Advisor, Jake Sullivan, that the U.S. Will be announcing more sanctions today. No specifics other than that these will relate to political figures and oligarchs, according to Jake Sullivan. So we'll be hearing more about that, presumably, at the meeting between President Biden and the NATO leaders. The Wall Street Journal reported that the U.S. Treasury was preparing sanctions against Roman Abramovich, Russian oligarch who owns the Chelsea Football Club in the UK. But according to the journal's reporting, President Zelensky spoke with President Biden and urged them to hold off because President Zelensky is hopeful that Abramovich may be able to serve as a go-between in peace talks. Speaking of President Zelensky, he will be speaking at this NATO meeting remotely. President Biden is scheduled after this meeting tomorrow. He's scheduled to go to Poland, a NATO ally that's right there on the front lines.
When it comes to this EU-US deal to try and cut reliance on Russian energy, what are we expecting there?
Well, this is a very important issue, of course, because Europe relies so heavily on energy imports from Russia, particularly gas. And so the U.S. is looking for ways to increase gas production, LNG production, looking for ways to get more LNG to Europe. This is something that is not just a long-term goal. We're not just talking about years. The goal is to start doing this quickly, in months. The European Commission wants to be able to have 80% 80% of their gas storage filled in time for this coming winter. The European Commission announced that yesterday, and by the following year they want to have 90%. We also know that prior to this trip, Jake Sullivan and Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen met with energy executives, including ExxonMobil CEO, to talk about ways that they could address some of these issues, try to speed up production, all with the aim of getting more gas to Europe so that they can reduce their reliance on Russia.
What could the father of the bride possibly be doing?
Connecticut today became the third state to suspend its state gas tax following similar moves in Maryland and Georgia. The national average for gas is now $4.24 per gallon, but in California it's nearly $6. The state's governor is proposing that all drivers, regardless of income level, get a $400 debit card to help pay for gas. That's up to $800 for 2 cars. The plan also includes free public transit for 3 months and a pause in the state's diesel tax.